My son left me in a foreign country, but when he returned home, his wife was now on my side. On the day I sold my 70-year-old family home, I gave my entire life's fortune to my only son. He took me to a luxury villa in Portugal, promising me a bright future. But right there, he snatched my passport and wallet, then sneered, "You're no longer useful to me. Enjoy the rest of your life as a homeless person," and left me alone. He made a fatal mistake. He forgot what his own wife whispered in my ear at the airport. He thought he had cornered me, but he didn't know that those words were the key to destroying his entire empire. Over 99% of viewers just sat through this story without clicking like or subscribe. Actually, it's easy, just one tap. What time is it in your area, and where are you listening? Arthur sat in the leather wingback chair, the one with the crackled armrests that perfectly contoured to a resting elbow, and let the silence of the house settle around him. It was a dense, heavy silence, filled with the ghosts of 70 years of living. Dust motes danced in the afternoon, sunbeams slanting through the bay window, illuminating the worn paths on the oriental rock path. Worn by his father, by him, and by a small, boisterous Leo, skidding in his socks with a joyous shriek. Every object held a memory of his late wife, Eleanor. The stack of books on the mantelpiece, her silver-framed reading glasses, still tucked in the topmost volume. The faint scent of lavender that clung to the velvet curtains. He was selling it all for a promise, a gold-plated promise of a future so bright it hurt his eyes to look at it directly. The promise had been unveiled a week prior, not in the stuffy office, but over sea bass and saffron risotto at Aperture, a restaurant so aggressively modern it felt like dining inside a Scandinavian art installation. Leo, ever the showman, had produced a tablet. With a flick of his wrist, he'd conjured images of sun-drenched villas with infinity pools bleeding into an azure Atlantic. "The Algarve coast, Dad," he'd said, his voice a low, confident hum. "It's the next Riviera. We're getting on the ground floor, and in 5 years, you're not just comfortable. You're legacy building." Flashy slides filled with hockey stick growth charts and impenetrable acronyms like ROI and EBITDA followed. Arthur, a man whose life's work involved decoding 18th century correspondence, felt a wave of dizziness. He loved his son, admired his ambition, this effortless navigation of a world that felt utterly foreign. "I'm not sure, Leo," Arthur had mumbled, pushing a piece of fish around his plate. "My entire fortune, everything Eleanor and I built, it seems risky." Leo had reached across the table, his hand covering Arthur's. On his wrist, a new Rolex gleamed under the recessed lighting, a watch Arthur knew cost more than his first car. "Dad, I understand," Leo said, his smile soft and pitying. "Your world is books, the beautiful days gone by. But this is the 21st century. We have to be decisive, or we get left behind. Just trust me. I'll take care of the present, and you can enjoy the results." The words were a warm blanket, but the subtext was a cold stone. "You're old, you don't understand. Let the adults handle it." And Arthur, yearning to close the gap that had grown between them since Eleanor's death, had simply nodded. He saw it as a chance to fulfill his wife's dying wish, whispered in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, "Take care of Leo." This was him, taking care of Leo. The cracks, however, were there if you knew where to look. He'd seen one at Leo and Isabel's sterilely perfect townhouse a few nights ago. Isabel, his intelligent, thoughtful daughter-in-law, had cornered Leo in the kitchen while he scrolled through his phone. "Are you sure you've done your research on this partner in Portugal, Leo?" she'd asked, her voice quiet but firm. "I couldn't find much on his company online. As a week, Leo hadn't even looked up from his laptop. "Honey, you just worry about designing beautiful things," he'd said, a casual flick of his thumb dismissing her. "Leave the complicated business part to me. I know what I'm doing." It wasn't just a brush off. It was a belittling, a pat on the head to a concerned child. Arthur had watched Isabel's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly before she composed her face into a placid mask. He'd noticed the tension, a low hum of discord beneath the surface of their perfect life. Later, as Leo had hugged him goodbye, the gesture felt strangely hollow. "This is a new chapter for our family, Dad. You deserve a vacation on a sunny beach." The embrace was firm, the words were right, but it lacked the bone-deep warmth Arthur remembered from Leo's childhood hugs. It felt like a performance for an unseen audience. That night, Arthur dreamt he was on one of those Portuguese beaches. The sand was impossibly white, the water a shimmering turquoise. He could feel the warmth of the sun on his aging skin, but a knot of anxiety tightened in his chest. He was calling for Leo, his voice swallowed by the rhythmic crash of the waves. He turned in a full circle, scanning the shoreline dotted with colorful umbrellas, but his son was nowhere to be found. Now, the taxi was waiting. The last of the boxes were taped shut, destined for storage. Leo clapped him on the shoulder, steering him toward the front door for the last time. "Ready for sunshine, Dad?" The airport was a blur of fluorescent lights and hurried announcements. As they waited at the gate for the Lisbon flight, Isabel arrived, breathless, to see them off. She ignored Leo, walking straight to Arthur and enveloping him in a hug that felt real, a desperate anchor in a sea of uncertainty. She pulled back, her eyes searching his, then she leaned in close. Her voice a conspiratorial whisper that Leo, busy checking his flight status, couldn't possibly overhear. "Take care of yourself, Dad," she murmured, her hand squeezing his arm with surprising strength. "And keep your passport safe." She kissed his cheek and was gone, melting back into the airport crowd. Arthur stood frozen, the warmth of her hug fading, replaced by a sudden, chilling dread. Keep your passport safe. It wasn't a casual travel tip. It was a warning. The boarding call for Lisbon echoed through the terminal, but for the first time, the gold-plated promise felt terrifyingly fragile. The first 48 hours in Lisbon were a dizzying symphony of opulence. Arthur, a man whose idea of luxury was a hardcover first edition, found himself adrift in a world he'd only read about in novels. Their suite at the Ritz Four Seasons had a balcony that overlooked the Eduardo VII Park, a view so perfect it seemed computer-generated. Leo was the magnanimous host ordering vintage ports Arthur had never heard of and treating him to dinners where the waiters outnumbered the patrons. He tried to sink into it, to let the sheer, unapologetic splendor wash away the memory of Isabel's whispered warning. He was on a grand adventure with his son. He was building a legacy. He repeated these phrases to himself like a mantra, a charm against the creeping tendrils of doubt. But the doubt was persistent. It crept in during their business meetings. They were never held in the gleaming high-rise offices Arthur had pictured. The first was at the rooftop bar, a thrumming, impossibly chic place where beautiful people sipped cocktails and gazed at the sunset over the Tagus River. Leo introduced him to a man named Mr. Silva, their Portuguese partner. Silva was a large man with a florid face, a shirt unbuttoned, one button too many, and a laugh that boomed across the music. He spoke in heavily accented broken English and seemed far more interested in refilling Arthur's glass than discussing property deeds. Arthur, trying to grasp onto something tangible, leaned in. "So, what part of the Algarve is our plot of land in?" "Exactly." Mr. Silva roared with laughter, clapping a heavy hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Don't worry, my friend. Just drink. Leo here. He takes care of everything." Before Arthur could press further, Leo smoothly intervened, a sheepish grin plastered on his face. "Dad, don't bother Mr. Silva with the technical details. We're celebrating the new partnership." The rest of the meeting dissolved into a blur of expensive liquor and meaningless toasts. The next day was a similar affair, this time at a loud, smoky fado club, where serious conversation was impossible. Arthur started to feel like a prop, an elderly father figure wheeled out to legitimize a performance. He was a historian, he knew how to gather evidence, and the evidence was mounting. The meetings were fake. The red alert came on their third night, back in the hushed, climate-controlled quiet of their hotel suite. Leo, fresh from the shower and wrapped in a plush hotel robe, sat on the edge of the bed, all business. "Dad, I need your passport, your driver's license, and your credit cards." Arthur froze, the book in his lap suddenly feeling like a lead weight. "Why?" "The lawyer needs to make certified copies of everything," Leo said, his tone matter-of-fact, professional. "It's to verify your identity and financial standing for the Foreign Investment Board. Standard procedure. I'll keep them all in my room safe afterward." The explanation was plausible, delivered with the easy confidence of a man who understood these things, but Isabel's words echoed in his head. A frantic alarm bell. Keep your passport safe. Arthur cleared his throat. Okay, well, can I come with you to the lawyer's office tomorrow? I'd like to meet him. However, the change in Leo was instantaneous. The charming, professional facade cracked, revealing a flash of raw, ugly anger beneath. What? He snapped, standing up. You don't trust me? Is that it? After everything I've done to set this up for us, for our family? If you want to treat me like a criminal, Dad, then maybe we should just call this whole thing off. It was a perfect weapon. Guilt. The accusation that Arthur, with his quiet, bookish life, was questioning Leo's world, his success, the implicit threat of emotional withdrawal. It was the decisive blow. Defeated, Arthur walked over to his suitcase, his hands trembling slightly as he retrieved the worn leather wallet and the navy blue passport. He handed them over. The moment the documents left his hand, a terrible, sickening sense of finality washed over him. He felt hollowed out. Leo, his good mood instantly restored, tucked them into his own bag. Great, this will speed things up immensely. Later, while Leo was on the balcony taking a call, Arthur picked up his cell phone, intending to call Isabel, just to hear her voice. No signal. He walked around the spacious suite, holding the phone aloft. Nothing. A dead zone in the five-star hotel. Paradise was officially a prison. The next day, Leo announced he had to fly to Germany for 24 hours. A side deal. Dad, just closing a small loop. Can't be helped. He'd already arranged everything. A car took them out of the city, down the coast, to a starkly modern beach villa, all glass and white concrete, perched on a cliffside. It was beautiful, but utterly isolated. As Leo prepared to leave, he handed Arthur a cheap-looking burner phone. Here, he said, so you can reach me. I've already programmed my number in. He gave his father another one of those hollow hugs and was gone. The silence that descended was absolute, broken, only by the crash of waves on the rocks below. Arthur waited a few minutes, his heart pounding. Then he picked up the new phone. He tried to navigate to the contacts list to see if he could find a way to dial internationally. There was no contact list, no keypad to dial a new number, no internet browser. There was only one function, a single button on the screen with the name Leo. He was completely, utterly alone, with nothing but a worthless phone and the terrible, dawning certainty that he had not been brought here for a vacation, but for a shearing. For the first hour, Arthur did nothing. He sat on a stark white sofa that felt as unforgiving as the situation itself and let the panic wash over him in cold, debilitating waves. He was trapped, a prisoner in paradise. No passport, no wallet, no identification. Just a cheap, useless phone and the clothes on his back. The villa, once a symbol of his son's supposed success, now felt like a mausoleum. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls didn't offer a view. They displayed his isolation to the empty sea and sky. Despair was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making each breath a conscious, ragged effort. But then, something shifted. The panic receded, not disappearing, but draining away to leave behind the bedrock of his entire adult life. The quiet, methodical mind of a historian. He has spent 40 years sifting through chaos, finding patterns in faded letters and forgotten ledgers, reconstructing narratives from fragmented evidence. This was just another archive, he told himself. A hostile, contemporary one, but an archive nonetheless. He would not surrender to emotion. He would analyze. He stood up and began to walk. He surveyed his prison with new eyes. He noted the electronic gate at the end of the long driveway, the high walls, the security cameras pointed at the main entrance. He also noted what wasn't there. No bars on the windows, no guards. The back of the property sloped down a rocky cliff face to a small, inaccessible beach. The security was designed to keep intruders out, not to keep an old man in. His observation turned to the only other person he saw, a gardener who came twice a week in a sputtering pickup truck. He was a local man with a sun-weathered face and hands like gnarled roots. Arthur began a cautious campaign of contact. The first day, he simply offered the man a glass of water, which was accepted with a nod. The next time, Arthur tried to communicate, using the handful of Portuguese words he picked up from a travel guide years ago, supplemented by desperate hand gestures. He pointed down the winding coastal road, villa, aldea, village. The gardener, whose name was Tiago, looked at him with wary eyes, but eventually seemed to understand. He pointed in the same direction. Sim duas milhas. Yes, 2 miles. He held up 2 fingers. A small, critical piece of data acquired. The biggest problem remained: communication. He had to contact Isabel. But how? He didn't know her cell phone number by heart. He racked his brain, his memory, his most powerful tool, sifting through decades of information. Then, a detail surfaced, small and seemingly irrelevant. Years ago, before she went freelance, Isabel had worked for a high-end interior design firm in Philadelphia called Argent Designs. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was something. If he could get to a computer, he could find the firm, he could call them, he could ask for her. His chance came on Tiago's next visit. Arthur met him at the gate, feigning a casual stroll. He pointed to the gate's control panel. "Cargo?" he asked, making a tapping motion with his fingers. Tiago hesitated, then, seeing only a confused old tourist, sighed and punched in the 4-digit code. Arthur watched his fingers, his historian's mind recording the sequence like a precious day from antiquity. 1482. The next morning, he made his move. With his heart hammering against his ribs, he punched in the code. The gate clicked open with a soft whir. He didn't run, he walked, trying to look like a man out for a morning constitutional, not a fugitive. Every passing car sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. The 2-mile walk along the narrow, sun-baked road felt like 100. Finally, he saw it. A small fishing village nestled in the cove. A postcard of whitewashed houses and blue fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. He found what he was looking for, a small, cozy cafe with a faded sign that read Café Sol. Inside, an older woman with kind, tired eyes was wiping down the counter. Arthur approached her, his carefully rehearsed speech feeling clumsy and inadequate. "Por favor," he began, his voice raspy. "Please, one call. America. Familia. Very important." He pointed to the old-fashioned rotary phone behind the counter, a museum piece in this day and age. The owner looked him over his expensive but now rumpled clothes. The desperation etched onto his face. For a moment, he thought she would refuse. Then, her expression softened with a look of maternal pity. "Familia," she said, her voice warm. "Familia é tudo. Family is everything." She nodded toward the phone. He knew he couldn't dial the design firm directly. He needed to find the number first. He pantomimed typing on a keyboard. Internet, Google. The woman pointed to an ancient desktop computer in the corner, covered in a lace doily. It took an agonizingly long time to boot up, but it worked. He found Argent Designs, found their main number, and scribbled it on a napkin. He handed the number to the owner, who slowly, carefully dialed. The call connected. Arthur's hands shook as he took the receiver. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Argent Designs, how may I direct your call?" "Isabel," Arthur said, his voice cracking. "Isabel Vance, please. I'm sorry. Isabel no longer works with us." His hope plummeted. "Please," he begged. "It's a family emergency. It's her father-in-law. My name is Arthur." There was a pause, a moment of hesitation that stretched for eternity. Then, "Hold on." Seconds later, a voice, sharp and clear and achingly familiar, came on the line. "Arthur? Oh my God, Arthur, are you okay?" Tears pricked his eyes. He only had seconds. "Lisbon. Leo took everything. The villa. I'm trapped." Isabel cut him off, her voice devoid of panic, replaced by a steely, urgent resolve. "I know. I suspected. I know his plan. Listen to me. Get to Lisbon airport. Go to the American Airlines ticket counter. I'll meet you there." The line went dead. The owner was looking at him with concern. Arthur hung up the phone, a small victory won, but the war was far from over. He had a destination, a sliver of hope, but he was still penniless and passportless, a ghost in a foreign country, with an impossible journey ahead of him. The smile Isabel gave Leo and Arthur at the airport gate was a masterpiece of marital devotion. It was brittle, painstakingly constructed, and the moment she turned and walked away, it shattered. The walk back to her car was a blur of forced composure. Each step a hammer blow of anxiety against her ribs. She was not reassured. She was terrified. Her whispered warning to Arthur felt like throwing a single life preserver into a churning, storm-tossed ocean. She could only pray he'd had the sense to grab it. Back in the sterile silence of the townhouse she and Leo called home, Isabel didn't weep. She went to work. In her sleek, minimalist office, she powered on her laptop, entered a 24-character password, and opened an encrypted file named Project Nightingale. There was no design work here. This was her real project for the last 18 months. It was a digital fortress filled with ammunition she'd been quietly gathering. Scanned bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts, copies of emails with forged prospectus documents, and, most damningly, audio files. Dozens of them. She clicked open a recording from 3 months prior. Leo's voice, slick with false sincerity, filled the room as he spoke on the phone. Then, she opened another file, a call he'd made to a friend just minutes later. Laughter, cruel, and sharp. They completely bought it, Leo's recorded voice crowed. Old people are so gullible. Just talk about the future for their grandchildren, and they practically throw their wallets at you. Every file was a monument to a painful sacrifice. Isabel thought of the last year, of playing the part of the trusting, slightly vapid wife. Every dinner where she had to smile at his lies, every time he touched her when she had to suppress a full-body flinch of disgust, it had all been for this. For Arthur, she told herself, her jaw tight. For the others, if she had left, if she had shown her hand a moment too soon, he would have vanished, covering his tracks like a phantom. So she had endured. The others were not abstract concepts. There were names in spreadsheet, people she had been discreetly contacting for weeks. The day after Leo and Arthur left for Portugal, she met with 2 of them, the Hendersons, at a coffee shop in a quiet suburb. They were a sweet, retired couple in their late 70s who radiated a gentle, bewildered sadness. They told her how Leo, a friend of their son, had convinced them to take out a reverse mortgage on their home of 40 years to invest in his revolutionary clean tech company. He was so charming, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice trembling as she clutched a paper napkin. He said this would secure our legacy, that our grandkids would thank us. And Isabel's heart ached with a mixture of pity and white-hot fury. She played them the recording, the one where Leo mocked them. Mr. Henderson's face went pale, then a dark, mottled red. His wife simply began to cry, silent tears tracking past down her wrinkled cheeks. It was in that moment that this stopped being a personal tragedy and solidified into a crusade for justice. She wasn't just saving Arthur, she was dismantling a predator. Armed with her meticulously organized evidence and the sworn statements of 3 other families Leo had defrauded, Isabel walked into the 9th District Police Precinct. The air was thick with a smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. The detective she spoke to, a man named Miller with tired, skeptical eyes, listened with an air of professional patience, as if he'd heard 1,000 domestic disputes. So, you're saying your husband, a successful businessman, is a con artist? He asked, leaning back in his chair. Isabel didn't flinch. She opened her laptop. I'm not saying it, detective. I'm proving it. She walked him through the encrypted files, the labyrinth of shell corporations, the falsified documents. She played him the audio clips. Miller's weary posture straightened. He leaned forward, his skepticism melting away, replaced by a focused intensity. By the time she left, she had a case number and a direct line to the Economic Crimes Unit. She had their attention. A week later, her phone rang from an unknown number. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was Arthur. The call was short, frantic. A desperate flare shot from the darkness. But it was enough. The moment she hung up, her strategic mind kicked into high gear. There was no time to wait for the authorities to navigate international jurisdiction. She had to get him out now. Using a portion of her own savings money she had carefully firewalled from Leo years ago, she went online and bought a one-way ticket from Lisbon to Philadelphia in Arthur's name. Then came the riskiest part. She called the international number for the small cafe in the Portuguese village, praying the kind woman Arthur had described would answer. She did. With painstaking slowness, using a translation app on her phone, Isabel dictated the airline confirmation code, begging the woman to write it down and give it to the American man. Familia, Isabel repeated, the word feeling both sacred and urgent. Por favor. Her final act was a call to Detective Miller. He'll be back, she said, her voice cold and steady. His flight from Munich lands at Philadelphia International tomorrow at 4:15 p.m. American Airlines, Flight 755, everything was in motion. The trap was set. The airport, once the stage for Leo's grand deception, was about to become the theater for his downfall. The only question left was whether Arthur could make it there. The journey to Lisbon was a tightrope walk over a chasm of fear. The cafe owner, Maria, had looked at the confirmation code Isabel had painstakingly dictated, then at Arthur's desperate face, and understood everything without needing the words. She'd made a quick, hushed call, and within the hour, a cousin of hers, a truck driver named Nuno, hauling a load of sardines to a cannery near the city, had agreed to take him. Arthur, folded into the passenger seat of the rumbling, fish-scented cab, felt a surge of gratitude so profound it was painful. This kindness from strangers was a balm on the wound of his son's betrayal. Every police car they passed on the highway sent a spike of pure adrenaline through his system. He was a fugitive with no papers, no money, and no language, armed with nothing but a sequence of letters and numbers scrawled on a napkin. Lisbon Airport was an overwhelming cacophony of light and sound. Arthur, looking disheveled and smelling faintly of tinned fish, approached the American Airlines counter like a man walking to his own execution. He presented the napkin to the agent. She looked at the code, typed it in, and then looked up at him, her polite customer service smile faltering. "May I see your passport, sir?" His blood ran cold. I don't have it," he stammered. "It was stolen." The agent's face hardened with professional suspicion. This was it. The plan would fail here. But then he remembered Isabel's instructions from their one brief call. "My daughter-in-law, Isabel Vance, booked the ticket. She said you could ask me verification questions." A supervisor was called. For 10 excruciating minutes, under the fluorescent lights, Arthur was gently interrogated. What was his date of birth? What was the address of the home he had just sold? What was his mother's maiden name? Question after question, a catechism of a life Leo had tried to erase. Finally, with a decisive nod, the supervisor approved the check-in. The boarding pass that printed out felt heavier and more precious than any first edition he had ever held. Hours later, the scene was reversed. Arthur now stood in the International Arrivals Hall at Philadelphia International Airport. The air here was different, familiar, yet charged with a suffocating tension. Beside him, Isabel stood straight and still, a portrait of coiled strength. Flanking them, almost blending into the crowd of waiting families, were two men in unremarkable blazers. Detective Miller and his partner, they didn't speak, but their presence was a silent, unshakable promise. Around them, families embraced, balloons bobbed, and signs bearing names were held aloft. For everyone else, this was a place of joyous reunion. For them, it was a place of reckoning. Then, the automatic doors from customs slid open, and a new stream of passengers trickled out. And there he was. Leo strode through the doors as if onto a movie set. He wore a tailored European suit, sunglasses perched on his head like a crown, and a smile of supreme, unassailable confidence. He was tanned, glowing with the success of his conquest. He walked with a movie star's gait, his eyes scanning the crowd, not for a loved one, but for an audience, for the admiration he felt was his due. He's looking for the camera, Arthur thought, a strange, cold detachment settling over him. In his mind, he's a conquering hero returning from a triumph. He has no idea his play has ended, and the only audience left are the people he betrayed. Leo's eyes found them. The confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second as he registered the two strangers with them, but then it returned, slightly strained. He started walking toward them, ready to spin the story, to charm his way through this unexpected wrinkle. He saw Isabel's face, a mask of cold fury. He saw his father, not broken or defeated, but standing tall, his expression one of profound, quiet sorrow. And then he truly saw the man beside them. He saw the subtle bulge of a holster under Miller's jacket. He saw the way they weren't looking at the arrivals board, but were looking directly, unequivocally, at him. Leo stopped, 10 feet away. The smug smile didn't just fade. It froze, cracked, and disintegrated, revealing the raw panic underneath. The color drained from his face. Detective Miller and his partner moved forward, their steps measured, unhurried. They flanked Leo, who seemed suddenly smaller, his expensive suit hanging on him like a costume. "Mr. Leo Vance?" Miller's voice was calm, almost gentle, which made it all the more terrifying. "We need you to come with us." Leo looked wildly from Miller to Isabel, then to his father, searching for an explanation, an escape hatch. There was none. Isabel met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw not his wife, but a stranger, an adversary who had outmaneuvered him completely. Arthur simply stood there, a silent, unshakable witness. His presence was the only verdict that mattered. As Miller gently turned him and placed his hands behind his back, the soft, metallic click of the handcuffs was barely audible over the airport's din. To Leo, it was the loudest sound in the world. Justice had not arrived with a thunderclap, but with a quiet, efficient whisper. As he was escorted away, a ghost in the midst of joyful reunions, the life he had so carefully constructed vanished before his eyes. The ride back from the airport was a silent film playing out in the dark cocoon of Isabel's car. City lights smeared across the windows, hypnotic and meaningless. The adrenaline that had coursed through Arthur's veins for the past 48 hours had evaporated, leaving behind a deep, cavernous exhaustion. There was no sense of victory, no triumphant satisfaction in the click of those handcuffs. There was only a vast, aching void where a sun used to be. Beside him, Isabel gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. They were two soldiers returning from a war they had won, only to find the battlefield was their own home, and the single casualty was the one thing that had connected them. When they entered the townhouse, the silence followed them, growing louder and more awkward in the high-ceilinged rooms. This was the house Arthur had visited for holidays, the one he'd believed was a testament to his son's brilliance and hard work. Now, the minimalist furniture, the expensive art on the walls, the very air itself felt tainted, like evidence in a crime scene. They were strangers, bound by a trauma too raw and complex for words. Isabel broke the spell. "Tea?" she asked, her voice sounding raspy, unused. "I think I'll make some tea." It was such a small, ordinary act, but it felt monumental. Arthur simply nodded, sinking onto a sofa that was as stylish as it was uncomfortable. He listened to the sounds from the kitchen, the running water, the click of the gas stove, the clink of ceramic mugs. They were the sounds of normalcy, a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos that had consumed them. She returned with 2 steaming mugs, setting them down on the cold marble coffee table. For a long moment, they just sat, letting the steam curl between them. "How long did you know?" Arthur finally asked, his voice low. Isabel looked down at her hands wrapped around the warm mug. "I started suspecting something was wrong about 2 years ago," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Little things, money that didn't add up, phone calls he'd taken another room. He started trying to manage my life." She took a breath, and the story began to spill out, not in a torrent, but in hesitant, painful fragments. She told him about her 30th birthday party. Leo had insisted on planning it, a grand gesture of his love. She'd given him a list of her oldest friends, the women who had seen her through college and her first heartbreak. When the night came, not a single one of them was there. The room was filled with his business associates, men with slick smiles and predatory eyes, and their silent, ornamental wives. When I asked him why, Isabel recounted, her eyes distant. He put his arm around me and smiled that perfect, reassuring smile. He said, "Honey, these are important relationships. We need to cultivate them. Are your old college friends really helpful to our future?" He had this way of turning his control into a form of anxious care. For me, for us, in no-bite animals. He had isolated her slowly and methodically, cutting her off from her support system under the guise of building a better life. He belittled her career, calling her design work a cute hobby. He managed their finances, giving her an allowance as if she were a child. Arthur listened, and a new, sick form of horror washed over him. He had seen his son as a con man, a thief. He had never considered that he was also an abuser. For the first time, he saw Isabel not as his son's wife, but as a victim in her own right. A strong, intelligent woman who had endured a quiet, suffocating hell. As the silence settled again, Isabel stood up. She walked over to the large, silver-framed photograph that hung in the place of honor above the fireplace. It was their wedding picture. Leo, handsome and beaming. Isabel, beautiful and hopeful. She looked at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she lifted it off the wall. She didn't smash it. She didn't throw it. She simply carried it to the side of the room and placed it gently on the floor, its face turned against the wall. The act was more powerful than any scream, more final than any slammed door. The past was being put away. Arthur looked around the room, truly seeing it for the first time. It wasn't a home. It was a stage set, and the lead actor was gone. A profound, paternal sadness, sharper than any anger, pierced through him. He grieved not for the man in handcuffs, but for the little boy who loved history books, the child he had raised, the son he had lost so long ago he couldn't even pinpoint the exact moment he had vanished. The sudden, shrill ring of the landline cut through the quiet room, making them both jump. Isabel answered, listened for a moment, and then held the phone out to Arthur. "It's your lawyer," she said. Arthur took the phone, his hand suddenly unsteady. He listened to the legal practicalities, the talk of arraignments and formal charges. And then the lawyer delivered the final piece of information. "Arthur, there's one more thing. Leo's bail hearing is set for tomorrow morning, and he's asking to see you. He says he'll only speak to you alone." Over 99% of viewers just sat through this story without clicking like or subscribe. Actually, it's easy, just one tap. What time is it in your area, and where are you listening? The drive to the county correctional facility was a journey into a different country, one of concrete and razor wire. The opulent world Leo had built, with its rooftop bars and sun-drenched villas, seemed like a fever dream. This was the reality. A gray, monolithic building squatting under a mercilessly clear sky. The process of entering was a systematic stripping of identity. Arthur surrendered his watch, his keys, his wallet. He walked through a metal detector, was patted down by a guard with bored, indifferent eyes, and was led through a series of corridors where the clang of iron doors echoed with a chilling finality. The air was cold and smelled of disinfectant and despair. He was shown to a small, sterile room and told to sit in a molded plastic chair bolted to the floor. Before him was a thick pane of glass, streaked and grimy. This was the new table between them, a barrier far more absolute than the one at the fine dining restaurant in Lisbon. The door on the other side of the glass opened, and Leo walked in. He wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, swallowing his frame and draining the color from his face. But as he sat down, Arthur saw that his son was not broken. He was not remorseful. His face was a mask of defiant victimhood, his eyes burning with a cold, accusatory anger. Any lingering, foolish hope Arthur had harbored that this ordeal might have shocked his son into self-reflection died in that instant. He was looking at a stranger. Leo picked up the black receiver of the visitor phone, and Arthur mirrored the action. The connection crackled to life. "Are you satisfied?" Leo's voice was a low, sarcastic sneer. "Seeing your only son in here? I hope you and that treacherous wife of mine are happy. This is what you wanted." Arthur looked at his son, the child he had taught to read, the boy he had once loved more than his own life, and felt a profound and bottomless disappointment. He didn't rise to the bait. The time for anger was over. "This is not what anyone wanted, Leo," Arthur said, his voice level, devoid of emotion. "Oh, save it," Leo spat. "You never understood. You never got it. To be successful, to win in this world, you have to do what needs to be done. You just wanted to hide in your ivory tower of books and pretend the world isn't a battlefield. Here it was, the grand justification. Arthur leaned slightly closer to the glass, his voice remaining quiet, clinical. The thing to do, Leo, was abandoning your father in a foreign country without a passport or a penny to his name the thing to do? Leo waved a dismissive hand, a temporary inconvenience. I would have come back for you. Was it the right thing to do to deceive the Hendersons? To take the life savings of an elderly couple who trusted you? It's called business, Dad, Leo shot back, his voice rising. A concept you will never, ever understand. They made a bad investment. That's how the game is played. It was like a chess match, as the prompt has suggested. Leo's every move was an emotional attack, a barrage of blame and rationalization. Arthur's defense was simple, unassailable logic. He wasn't arguing. He was holding up a mirror, and Leo was enraged by the reflection. With each question Arthur asked, he was chipping away at the facade, not to find the son he once knew, but to force Leo to confront the absolute void where his conscience should have been. So this is it, then? Arthur asked, a genuine academic curiosity in his tone. This is your philosophy? That other people are just tools for your success? That trust is a weakness to be exploited? I gave people an opportunity, Leo insisted, his face flushed with self-righteous fury. An opportunity to be part of something big. You think anything great was ever built without risk? Without someone being decisive? You spent your life studying great men? You think they were all saints? Arthur felt the last emotional tether to his son's snap. It didn't break with a fiery explosion, but with a quiet, cold severance. He was no longer speaking to his son. He was observing a specimen, a case study in incurable narcissism. He felt no more anger, no more sadness. He just felt empty. There was nothing here to save, nothing to redeem. He placed the receiver gently back in its cradle. On the other side of the glass, Leo was still talking, his face contorted, his words now unheard. Arthur stood up. He didn't offer a wave or a nod. He simply turned and walked to the door, rapping once for the guard. He had not come here to punish his son or to forgive him. He had come to say goodbye. This was it. As he walked out of the oppressive gray building and back into the blinding sunlight, he felt a profound sense of release. He was blinking, adjusting to the brightness, when the woman approached him. She was in her late 60s, with a kind face edged with worry. He recognized her from a photograph Isabel had shown him. It was Mrs. Henderson. Mr. Vance? She asked, her voice soft. Arthur nodded. We just wanted to thank you, she said, and your daughter-in-law. For having the courage, Arthur didn't know what to say. He could only offer a sad and pathetic smile. He took our money, she continued, a surprising strength entering her voice as she glanced back at the prison. He took our security, but he can't take our story. You know, there are going to be a lot of people at that trial, a lot of people who want to tell their stories. And with that, Arthur understood. The personal tragedy was over. The public reckoning was about to begin. The courtroom was a theater of quiet tension. Polished wood gleamed under sterile fluorescent lights, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and nervous anticipation. Arthur and Isabel sat in the front row of the public gallery, not as accusers, but as silent observers, part of a solemn congregation. They were no longer the sole proprietors of their tragedy. They were here to bear witness to a shared history of deceit. The press was there, a restless beast in the back rows. Their cameras held at bay by court order, but their pens scratching furiously across notepads, sketch artists capturing the scene in swift, charcoal strokes. This was not a trial to be held in secret. This was a public autopsy of a man's character. Leo sat at the defendant's table, flanked by his expensive, beleaguered lawyer. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, a desperate attempt to project the image of the successful businessman he no longer was. He tried to appear calm, detached, as if these proceedings were a tedious bureaucratic error. But the camera's gaze is a relentless, burning thing. A news photographer's lens would catch the subtle, rhythmic clenching of his jaw, the slight sheen of sweat on his brow, the way his eyes would dart toward the jury and then away, unable to hold their gaze. The prosecution didn't build its case on complex financial charts or dry legal statutes. It built it with human lives, one by one. The victims Leo had cultivated and discarded took the stand. Each testimony was its own small, heartbreaking play. First came Mrs. Henderson. She walked to the stand slowly, a frail woman made strong by her indignation. Her voice, soft and trembling at first, grew steady as she spoke. She didn't talk about interest rates or investment vehicles. She talked about the rose garden her husband had planted at their home of 45 years, the one they had mortgaged on Leo's advice. He told us it was for our grandchildren, she said, her eyes finding Leo's for a fleeting moment. He said they would be so proud of what we'd built for them. Now, we might lose the only home they've ever known. Then came a montage of ruin. A young single mother, a nurse who worked double shifts, spoke of the inheritance her parents had left her. It was a modest sum she had guarded fiercely, a nest egg for her daughter's college education. Mr. Vance called it seed money, she said, her voice laced with a bitter irony. He said we were planting a tree for my daughter's future. It turns out he was just digging a hole. A man in his 50s, a hardware store owner with calloused hands and an honest, open face, described how Leo had convinced him to invest his business's expansion fund. I was going to hire 2 more people from the neighborhood, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. I bought his story, hook, line, and sinker. Now, I'm just trying to keep my doors open. With each story, the air in the courtroom grew heavier. The scale of Leo's cruelty was laid bare, not in dollars and cents, but in shattered dreams and stolen futures. The victims were no longer isolated individuals nursing their private shame. Here, in the shared space of the courtroom, they became a community. They found strength in each other's voices, nodding in grim understanding, a quiet hand reaching out to squeeze a shoulder in the gallery. Arthur sat and listened, and the personal wound of his own betrayal began to transform. He felt it connect to the pain of the Hendersons, the nurse, the store owner. He was part of a tapestry of trust that his son had systematically set ablaze. Beside him, Isabel was a pillar of quiet resolve. This was the validation she had fought for through months of silent, lonely fear. Every story told on the stand was an echo of the evidence she had so carefully, so painfully gathered. The prosecutor, in his closing argument, gestured not to Leo, but to the faces in the gallery. This case is not about sophisticated financial fraud, he said, his voice resonating with conviction. It is about the theft of the most valuable currency we have, trust. Mr. Vance didn't just steal money. He stole hope. He stole security. He stole the future from people who looked him in the eye and believed his promises. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. The verdict was a formality, a foregone conclusion reading to the silent, solemn record. Guilty on every count. A ripple of quiet, tearful relief went through the gallery. Leo's mask finally broke. For a single, unguarded moment, as the bailiff moved behind him, his face was a canvas of pure, undiluted rage and humiliation. His reputation, the idol at whose altar he had sacrificed everything and everyone, had been irrevocably destroyed in the public square. As Arthur and Isabel left the courthouse, they were met with a chaotic scrum of reporters shouting questions. They pushed through without a word, the flashing lights feeling intrusive and meaningless. The real story was over. They got into the car, the silence returning, but this time it was different. It wasn't awkward or heavy, but hollow, exhausted. The legal battle was won. Justice, in its formal, imperfect way, had been served. But as Isabel started the car and pulled away from the curb, a new, daunting reality settled over them. Leo's trial was over. Theirs was just beginning. Arthur's life savings, his entire fortune, was gone. Isabel was a widow to a living man, facing a mountain of debt he had accrued in their name. They had won the war, but had lost everything in the process. Where, in all this ruin, did they even begin to rebuild? The weeks following the trial were a harsh, grayscale epilogue to the lurid melodrama of the past few months. The public spectacle was over, leaving Arthur and Isabel to navigate the quiet, grinding reality of their shared ruin. The sleek townhouse, once a symbol of success, was now just a collection of assets to be liquidated. Isabel moved through the rooms with a weary efficiency, tagging furniture for the estate sale. Her face a stoic mask that only occasionally crumbled when she thought no one was looking. The house was under contract, its sale price destined to be devoured by the mountain of debt Leo had secretly accumulated in their name. Arthur, for his part, felt a sense of profound failure that was in some ways sharper than the initial betrayal. He had lost his life savings, the product of a lifetime of prudent work. At 71, he was scanning online job boards for part-time lecturing positions and library assistant roles, his dignity a luxury he could no longer afford. He felt like a burden to Isabel, this woman who had sacrificed so much and was now saddled with him. He had come to see her as a daughter, a far better and truer child than the one he had fathered, and his inability to provide for her was a constant, dull ache in his chest. They were adrift in a lifeboat, having survived the storm only to find themselves in an endless, empty ocean. It was on a bleak Tuesday afternoon, surrounded by packing boxes and the ghosts of a life that had never been real, that the letter arrived. It was addressed to Arthur, sent from a law firm he didn't recognize. The envelope was thick, made of expensive cream-colored paper. He opened it with a sense of dread, assuming it was yet another creditor, another demand for a debt he couldn't pay. He unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letterhead was for the estate lawyers of Eleanor Vance. His breath caught in his throat. He sat down heavily on a sealed box, his hands suddenly trembling, and began to read. The legalese was dense, but the message was clear. It stated that, upon his death, his wife Eleanor had established a small, separate trust. She had funded it with a portion of her own inheritance and a life insurance policy he had never known existed. The terms of the trust were specific, peculiar even. The principal was to be managed by the firm and was inaccessible to him under normal circumstances. It will only be activated and disbursed in full under one of two conditions: his incapacitation or, the letter stated, in the event of a catastrophic financial loss resulting from a demonstrably fraudulent investment. Arthur read the line again, and then a third time. Fraudulent investment. She had known, or, if not known, she had suspected. Eleanor, his practical, grounded, fiercely intelligent wife, had seen the cracks in their son's character long before he had. She had loved Leo, of course, but her love was not blind. It was the clear-eyed love of a woman who had always seen the world for what it was, not what she wished it to be. She had observed Leo's casual relationship with the truth as a teenager, his burgeoning sense of entitlement, his hunger for the appearance of success over the substance of it, and she had quietly, without a word to him, built a firewall, a final, posthumous act of protection. He thought back to their life together, seeing it now through this new, heartbreakingly clear lens. He was the dreamer, the academic lost in his books. She was the anchor, the one who balanced the checkbook, who read the fine print, who had always possessed a quiet, unshakable common sense. This trust wasn't an indictment of his judgment. It was an act of profound, preemptive love. It was Eleanor looking after him, even from beyond the grave. The letter fell from his trembling hands. The sterile, empty room was suddenly filled with her presence, so powerfully he could almost smell her lavender scent. The financial relief was immense, a tidal wave of possibility that washed away the suffocating dread. But it was secondary. The real gift was this affirmation, this message sent through time. He was not a fool. He was a man who had been loved by a woman of extraordinary wisdom and foresight. Isabel walked into the room, a roll of packing tape in her hand, and saw him sitting on the box, his shoulders shaking. She rushed to his side, assuming it was a moment of grief. Then she saw the tears streaming down his face were not tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming, cleansing gratitude. He couldn't speak. He simply handed her the letter. She read it, her eyes widening with each line. When she finished, she looked at him, and her own eyes welled up. In that moment, they weren't a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law. They were two survivors, two people who had been loved by the same remarkable woman, who had just been thrown a lifeline from the past. The money was a fresh start. but the legacy of Eleanor's love, her quiet, enduring wisdom that was their true inheritance. Over 99% of viewers just sat through this story without clicking like or subscribe. Actually, it's easy, just one tap. What time is it in your area? And where are you listening? A year can be a lifetime. The person who had sat in the sterile prison visiting room was not the same man who now stood behind the worn oak counter of the New Chapter bookstore. The air here was his native element, a comforting blend of aging paper, binding glue, and freshly brewed coffee. A small bell tinkled as the door opened, emitting a gust of autumn air and a customer who greeted him by name. This was the new rhythm of his life, a quiet, contented cadence that had healed him more than time ever could. With Eleanor's unexpected legacy, they hadn't tried to reclaim the life they'd lost. That life had been a mirage. Instead, they had invested in a new one. They bought a struggling used bookstore in a small, historic town in the Hudson Valley. It was a place of old stone buildings and genuine community, a world away from the cold, transactional glitz Leo had craved. Isabel, with her impeccable eye for design, had worked a quiet magic. She hadn't gutted the place but had honored its history, transforming it into a warm, inviting haven. She painted the walls a deep, calming blue, installed comfortable reading chairs in sunlit nooks, and turned a neglected back wall into a gallery space for local artists. Their lives found a new purpose within these walls. On Saturday mornings, Arthur would gather a small group of children in the corner of the store and, his historian's voice now animated with theatrical flair, tell them stories of ancient heroes and daring explorers. To watch the wonder in their eyes was a joy more profound than any stock portfolio's growth. Isabel, meanwhile, curated the art exhibits, organized poetry readings, and hosted a book club that had become the social heart of the town. She had found her calling not in designing sterile showpieces for the wealthy, but in creating a space that brought people together. They were partners, in the truest sense of the word. Their relationship was not one of romance, but of a deep, resilient, familial love forged in the crucible of betrayal. It was a bond built on shared cups of tea in the quiet mornings before the store opened, on the easy understanding of a past book, on the silent acknowledgement that they had saved each other. One afternoon, sorting through a pile of mail, Arthur came across a familiar, unwelcome letterhead, the law firm that represented Leo. His heart gave a single hard thud. He opened it. It was a formal, almost pleading request from Leo's lawyer. His client was coming up for his first parole hearing. A letter from his father, attesting to his remorse and potential for rehabilitation, would carry significant weight. The old Arthur might have agonized over it, torn between paternal duty and the hard-won peace he had found. But the man standing in the bookstore was different. He read the letter, a sense of detached pity washing over him. He felt no anger, only a quiet finality. He didn't reply. He didn't even throw the letter away. Instead, he walked over to the classic section, his fingers tracing the spines of books that contained the whole of human experience. He pulled out a worn paperback copy of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. He wrapped it carefully, addressed it to Leo's lawyer, and placed it in the outgoing mail bin without a note. Later that evening, as he and Isabel were closing up, he told her what he had done. She looked at him, a small, sad, and deeply proud smile on her face. When his lawyer sent the letter, Arthur said, looking around at the rows of books, at the silent, waiting stories, begging me to write about his character, I realized I already had. My legacy isn't money. It's the stories we live and the ones we leave behind. He chose his story. Now he has to read it to the end. He walked to the large front window of the shop. The streetlights of the small town cast a warm, golden glow on the sidewalk. Across the square, the baker was locking up, and he raised a hand in a familiar wave. Arthur waved back. He was not a wealthy man in the grand house. He was not a lonely victim. He was a member of a community, a keeper of stories, a man who had, after a long and perilous journey, finally found his true home.